G'day, welcome back to the Talking Leadership TV podcast series. Thanks again for joining me. My guest today is Mark LeBusque. Mark is universally known as the human manager. His proven techniques for elevating leaders and energizing employees makes him an internationally sought after speaker, facilitator, mentor, and coach. He has 2 books, Being Human and The Little Book of Human, that have challenged the way managers and organizations view the value of the 100-year-old management system and have sparked a more human-based approach across the globe. He has an innate ability to speak and seek the truth, provokes humans to step into their own reality, and skillfully combines lived experience, practicality, and simplicity with textbook theory. Mark is a Harvard Business School trained and accredited practitioner in adaptive leadership and instincts at work, and is affectionately known as a certified bogan. I enjoyed the discussion with Mark today, and it provides some insights into leadership that I am looking forward to sharing with you. As always, thank you for your support of the podcast, and I'll hand over to Mark. Mark, thanks for your time and for wanting to have a chat with me around leadership. But let's go to first principles here, and I want to ask you a question, a 2-parter. Why deal with leaders in the work that you do professionally? And what is it about leadership that excites you in terms of working with other human beings on the leadership topic area?
Well, so why work with leaders in this space? Look, because I think that there's a requirement to keep some of the good from, I think, the historical leadership practices and leadership development programs, but there's an even greater need to bring leadership into the future. And I think that's the big one for me, Eric, is that my approach to this leadership work is very much around leading self. And I got a bit disappointed, even though I used to love going to leadership development programs when I was in the corporate world. I used to get disappointed that we just get to fill out some sort of psychometric profile of ourselves, and that was all the work we did on self. And I think it was a lazy facilitator's way of having something to label people with. So why work in this space? I think because I'm trying to break the model. There are some good psychometric profiling tools out there, by the way, but break the model that you shouldn't be told what you are as a leader. You should be given the opportunity in leadership development work to discover that. So I think that's the first part. That's what really, the way I see people go on the self-discovery path is pretty powerful. So I think that's the first part. That second question, mate, I'm nearly 56. I've forgotten that second question. What was it again?
So, and I think you've kind of answered it, but it was more around why work with leaders as a day-to-day thing. So you've talked about that exploring knowledge of self and what does it mean to be a leader, the introspective side of things, which I've got a follow-up question for you on that. But yeah, so of all the topic areas for you personally, leadership is a critical thing for you. Why? Well, what's your why? I guess I'm asking.
Because I think we've confused. I was very fortunate, I say fortunate, to come across some work on a leadership framework called adaptive leadership, created by Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky out of the Harvard Kennedy School, and also to attend that school and do some work around understanding that framework some more. And I always had a view that I thought this myself before I got to Harvard, was that we really did confuse authority and leadership, that we called people leaders because they were in positions that had fancy titles and they might have had the big office and they had some authority and responsibility, some important things to do. But for some reason, we called them leaders who were part of a leadership team, who went to a leadership meeting every week and then a leadership offsite. And I just think we throw that word around like it's candy at a kid's birthday, rather than going, leadership's actually what you do, not what your fancy title is. And so I have a real desire to help people to understand that leadership is a thing, as in it's what you do. It's not a person, it's an action or an activity. I think there are too many leadership actors and not enough leadership action. So my thought is, we've got to show that everyone in an organization, and I mean everyone, has an ability to demonstrate leadership. And they don't need, and a lot of people say this, but they don't need to have a fancy title. So I'm trying to break that down. So I look at it like this and say, imagine the opportunity in an organization if you truly believe that everyone in your organization was capable of demonstrating leadership and you gave them permission to do so.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what you just said then. The something that comes to mind, and I've done this in some conversations with serving and ex-military people, is when they explained how leadership was developed in the military context, that you should be able to lead at level below and above your pay grade, so to speak, if needed in an operational sense. And I think that translates quite nicely into what you're saying about organizations, that potentially everyone has the capacity to lead. You don't necessarily need the fancy title. I couldn't agree more with that. But organizations are what they are, and people like structures and they like hierarchy. So I tend to think personally, and this isn't a shot at businesses, you've got to organize in some way. And so having some people that make those final decisions are your key leadership people, but it doesn't stop everyone in the business being a leader or contributing that. Now, the challenge, I think, and you've touched on it, and might get your views on this if I can, is how do you inculcate in existing leaders to let go of some of that position power and allow others to help them find the best solution without worrying about it has to be them making every decision without reference to others? How do you do that? Have you found some of that in the work that you've done?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The way to do that is you've got to get back to, I look at leadership through three different lenses: leading self, leading your team, and leading your organization. So I think what we need to do for those more senior roles in organizations, say the decision makers that you talked about before, I refuse to call them leaders, because leadership is an act, not an individual. What you've got to be able to do with them, really, really importantly, is you need to be able to take them back 2 steps into leading self. Because I think one of the things that happens, Eric, as we go through the hierarchy and we move up in the hierarchy, is that we start to forget the human being that we are, and we sort of get caught and get romanced in this positional power that we have. So the first thing that I say to people who find it hard to let go is, let's take you back to you. Let's take you back to Eric. And what I want to understand from you, Eric, is what would you fear if you had to let go of some of what you think is your rightful area to make decisions? What if you gave some of that work back to your team? What are the things that you fear? Now, when I've asked that question, usually they'll start with, I don't fear anything. And I go, well, you do, because you're a human being. Where we usually get to is that they fear loss of control, and they certainly fear a loss of relevance, contribution, and the big one, identity. So how do we bring them back? I think we've got to take them back into being the human being and say, let's start with your fears so we can understand what you're working against. Because, we're a survival species, and when we're fearful of not surviving, and human, CEOs and MDs and those top echelon people, they're human beings as well. They have the same fears as mid-level managers, transactional supervisors, because they're human.
Yeah, where to start? There's a lot to unpack there. I guess if you ask me the question, yeah, one would be loss of control, but the other one would be potential impact on your reputation. And some people spend an entire career trying to build their reputation. I don't mean that from a power point of view. I mean that you do good work and your decisions lead to what I would say would be the best outcomes that are humanly possible. And yeah, I understand why people would be fearful of that, because there are some of us who are in leadership roles that maybe need to check themselves on this a bit, I guess, is it's not always about building a power base or building a silo. And on the come up, you're learning from people about how to interact with other human beings. But once you get there, I think some of us forget the pathway that we took to get there, and you lose some of it. I say this in inverted commas: you lose some of your humanity once you get to that position, because people, and this is as much, I think, an issue with the lead your team as much as it is with the person in a position of authority. Is people put all sorts of stock in CEO, GM, a director, a chairman, president, prime minister, whatever it is. That there's some expectations when you get there, and so pushing against those expectations, I think, is a bigger deal than people think about. And so your question's a lot deeper than you might think, because everyone has some views that they don't want to necessarily shatter around what is a traditional leader. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and I'll just add something else in here, that we have worked in a system for 100+ years that has promoted, in the workplace system, that has promoted technical competence. So we can't but end up in a situation where we feel that the way we continually get promoted is we show that we're still technically good at the work that we've always done. So, for instance, I used to work as an afternoon shift loader and driver. And if I picked the parcels up at the right time and put the parcels in the right bag, they promoted me into the call center. And for those people who've heard me talk before, they've heard this before, I could find the missing wedding dress or the missing mining part. So then they promoted me into sales and I could sell things. So then they promoted me into a branch manager's role. And then ultimately you end up in a role with a significant span of control, but you keep doing what you did before to reward yourself, which is keep getting involved in doing the day-to-day work. And I think this is one of the greatest opportunities for any organization, but it's a really challenging one, is to have that conversation with someone and go, we don't expect you to be doing all the work anymore, but we're not going to tell you just not to do it. We're going to ask you about what do you fear what if you're not doing that? Well, all those things that you talked about and I talked about before. So you make absolute sense. I think it was important to overlay that so that people will be listening to this going, like, tell me anyone who hasn't been promoted based on their technical competence. Show me them and I'll be very surprised.
Yeah, Mark, that comes up a hell of a lot around people being promoted because they're technically savvy, or they've been in a role, so they've occupied a chair for 5 years, 10 years, and suddenly there seems to be a compulsion almost from the powers that be to promote that person because of time served. And ultimately, a couple of questions don't get asked. Does that person really want the kind of leadership role that the company expects them to undertake? And two, have we prepped them enough for what it means to be a leader in a modern workplace? And I would suggest to you, and you're smiling when I say this, but I think companies of whatever size don't give that enough forethought before they make their decisions. And you hope that it works out well, but sometimes it leads to very toxic outcomes, not just for the person promoted, but for the people around them. And that's a perennial problem that I don't think we're ever going to escape, is my view of it. What would
Yeah.
your view be, mate?
So my view is this. I think you've asked a great question. I run an in room. I call it an experience, not a program. It's my marketing team come up with that. That's me, and it's like the human manager experience. The question I ask anyone that comes along is, did anyone ever ask you if you wanted to manage another human being as you've been promoted through your organization? And there has not been one person in 9 years that has said, yes, I was asked that question. So I think you've hit on something that's really important here, is because we're so romanced in the technical proficiency piece, and then we might do, the old 9 box capability assessment of someone. There should be a little question at the bottom of all those things going, have we asked that person if they want to pursue a career in human management? We don't do that. So that's the first part of it. And then the second part of it is, if they say yes to that, and you've nailed it as well here too, Eric, is what's the development plan for them? Because I look at it this way, and I think this is one of the other reasons why leadership's such an important space for me is we've got to look at everyone as unique. So, I'm a bit extroverted, you might be a bit introverted. You've had a background in a certain thing, I've had a background in something else. Our lived experiences are different. Our family situation could be different. We need to be thinking about all of that stuff when we're creating not a cookie cutter development program, but what do we need to really help elevate Eric to the point where he can be very, very capable and has the capacity to lead well. And that might be different to what we've got to do for Mark. So I think you've really nailed a couple of things there. People ask the question, do you want to manage another human being? If you haven't asked that, you haven't done your due diligence.
Yeah, it's an important question, and as long as you haven't copyrighted it, I might start using it in other.
Mate, use it. It's also in my first book, and I think I was never asked the question myself, but I think everyone should be asked that question now, because there are people who I think, and when I started asking that question to people, they'd go, "No, I never got asked that, but I don't want to be promoted any further because I don't want to be up in amongst the." I'd like to sort of play two out and two back because I don't feel safe enough up there. But secondly, what I'd like to be able to do is, what if you just gave me some additional mentoring roles where I could help mentor some people? Then you go, they don't need a new fancier title than the last one they had to feel like they're still developing their skill set in an organization.
Yeah, and that raises some issues in my head around leaders. Are they teachers? Are they mentors? Or are they coaches? And people slide into those different roles in very different ways. I like that idea of mentoring. I had a little bit of that when I was in the public sector. I never sought it formally, but I chanced on some managers that were probably decades ahead in their thinking that sort of took me under their wing and said, here's, pardon the language, but here's the shit you shouldn't do when you're in a office environment. And these are the reasons why. And if you treat people with the same respect you expect on a daily, people will see you as a good bloke or a good Sheila, whatever the nomenclature is, to say, yes, this is someone who understands other human beings. And I can't believe that some people on the come up don't think about that. I certainly did. But the idea, and you brought it up, and I'd like to explore it if you've got a second, is the way that you interact with leaders. Because I know you deal with leaders at multiple levels across different organizations. Do you see the leadership role as being coach, mentor, teacher, or some mix of those things depending on the situation?
I think it's all of the above, and it's situational. So from there's a lot of arguments that will say that the manager can't be the mentor for the staff, and I sort of get that one. They can be a coach and they can be a teacher. I think mentorship is highly underrated and underutilized. There's a vast amount of experience in organizations, and for whatever reasons, we can start to say things like this, Eric, is, oh, look, Mark's 56 now, he's coming towards the end, we'll just put him in the corner for a while and wait till he retires. We're missing out on mentoring opportunities. There's reverse mentoring opportunities to learn from the younger folk now. And certainly that's one thing that I think I still learn, particularly if it's my podcast or from my kids who are a lot more tech savvy than what I am, mate. I think we wear multiple hats in these roles. And I think what's really important is that we know which hat to have on at which time. And one of the other things that's not done to us is we're not forced to wear a hat because that's the hat that someone else tells us to wear because that's the latest program that we're working with. And you just have the agility in the moment to go, hey, this is a mentoring opportunity right now. Versus, no, this is now a coaching piece where I'm not going to give them my experience and tell them my answers. I'm actually going to challenge them to think more deeply about it. But another time I might go, so for instance, we've had a good chat about, you with what you're doing. I could go into mentor mode with you and do a little bit of stuff around, I've been doing it for 9 years and here's some things to watch out for. But I could also go into coaching mode and go, so, okay, what do you think about that you've just explained it? What do you think the right way forward is? So that's the beauty of being self-aware and aware of others around you is that you know when to go into the different modes at different times, and that could change at the click of the finger.
Yeah, agreed. One thing I was going to ask you as a follow up to my initial questions was around leader capabilities. Now, you've seen what good and bad looks like in the world of work, and you've given some insights into what you believe are important for leaders to have, and that sense of self leadership, self management. I would suggest one that I would throw in based on what you've said, and feel free to disagree, is around that being a reflective practitioner when you're a leader. So thinking about what you've done, asking yourself what you could have done better and what went well and what didn't, but then taking that next step and getting some external feedback from someone to say, well, this is what happened. What's your assessment of what was there? And I know that's difficult to do in some business settings, but that idea of having someone that you can knock on the door, a peer, potentially, I tended to use a mentoring network amongst other CEOs in the industry that I used to be in. And I saw all of my colleagues as miles ahead of me in terms of their experience. So I would, me going to them was a learning experience for me, being able to test a couple of things out and to try and get their perspectives. Now, I didn't always agree with the perspective that came back the other way, but always the fear that I had to get rid of was, if you're going to be fair dinkum and ask someone for feedback, get it warts and all, because a watered down set of feedback that makes you feel nice and cuddly and warm is not going to help you if there really is some shit that you need to address in your practice. Does that ring true for you?
Absolutely, because I've had two versions of, let's call manager Mark, bad Mark, as a young, over ambitious, high ego arsehole, and who didn't really care. What he cared about was the title that he wanted to get to, which is estate manager. And when I look back on that, on bad Mark, I think I learnt more from bad Mark than I learnt from, a couple of decades past that good Mark, who asked himself the question, which was, what would happen if I treated my people like human beings? Because I hadn't been. Now, I only found that out because I had an amazing HR business partner at the time who grabbed me one day and said, look, here's some things you need to know. And here's your part in the mess of what's going on. And she gave it to me straight between the eyes. And I usually resisted that stuff. But when you get to a certain point, you go, you know what, there's a pattern here. And so I think all feedback is a gift. I truly believe that. It's only that we use that word feedback. Like if I said, I'm going to give you some feedback, Eric, on your podcast, like you'll go straight into your bad news filing cabinet in your head going, oh, I wonder what he's going to say. But like, to me, it's like, what I like about this podcast is it's two human beings having a conversation. Now, we've got to get over the fact that when we tell someone you're going to get some feedback, that they go into sort of shrink mode and go into defense mode and go, be open to what you hear. Be open to the intention that it's being delivered to you by another human being, and be open to the fact that a different perspective, and you said this before, which is critical in leadership, that all perspectives are welcomed, even though, when someone told me that you're a bit intimidating and that you don't build good social networks and that you don't communicate well, that all stung me. I can go two ways. Then I can go, yeah, but that's just Eric and I don't get on. Or I can go, no, I actually think Eric's got a point there. And now I'm going to explore that a bit more and ask him some more questions like, hey, can you help me with that, mate? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you put it back on the person. So as much as I can't disagree with anything that you said about getting feedback coming to you, and hopefully not going into that filing the feedback into the bad feedback. And I like that analogy, and I tended to do that in my younger days. But after I've lived some life, and me pushing 50, I've seen life go by, some good and some bad in professional experience. I'm at the point now where I just want it all, warts and all, and I'm happy to sift out the things that I need to progress, and the things that I don't necessarily agree with, I will ask a follow-up question, but what I really liked from what you just said, and I'd like to put this into practice if I could, if someone does deliver something that's constructive feedback, or hey, you're not doing something at all right, if you're prepared to tell me that, then can you give me a possible solutions or pathways to get better, even if that's directing me to someone else going, look, I've seen it and I felt it, but you should go to John X who will help you out, or Susan
Mm.
Y who will know something that I don't. And that's constructive. And I guess I'm a big believer in constructive feedback, not destructive feedback, because it's easy to say, well, you're shit at this or you're not good at that, and leave it at that without providing some context.
And that sounds like a standard performance review. So, we get taught how to tell people about what they're not doing well. And I want to pose this to your watchers and your listeners: is that how about starting to tell people what they're doing really well? Because I have a bit of a view when I ask for feedback on what I do. I ask people, tell me what I did really well, and they're like, don't you want to know the other stuff? And I go, well, you can tell me that too, but I actually want to know what I did well. I get sick and tired of hearing people that I coach say, I don't know why I'm here because my boss tells me I'm doing a good job. And I say, well, what are you doing a good job at? And they go, well, I don't know. I only know that I'm doing a good job. If you're managing people and you're truly stepping into your leadership, my recommendation is saying to someone they're doing a good job and not backing it up with some actual examples is like leaving them high and dry. And I think this is where we get into this constructive and destructive feedback. I only see it as feedback unless someone turns up with an intent to be harmful.
Yeah, and I think 99% of these interactions are not intended to be destructive, but sometimes people's intent is not good.
No,
And to believe that we don't have toxic leaders that create toxic workplaces is just not, is putting your head in the sand. I think that stuff exists. And
yep,
to go back to something you said before, I think I've learnt more from those leaders that have not been as effective as they could be than the ones that were the great. So the great leaders stand out in your mind for certain reasons, but almost rivaling that memory in the really bad ones is, this is the kind of shit I don't want to do if I get to a point where I've got the ability to make decisions and have some authority over teams to get some stuff done. And you do learn from your own mistakes and learn from those that you see um, from other people. So, Mark, if you had a list, however long that list needs to be, what do you believe are key leader capabilities in the leadership that you're seeing at the moment?
so I get usually an A4 sheet of paper when this question comes up, and I put a line down the middle and two columns. And one column is the technical capabilities, and the other one is the human capabilities. Both are really important because I think you bring those together, and that's where things work well. But I think it's got to start with the human capabilities. So it's self-awareness, it's empathy, compassion, it's it's honesty, it's courage, and I'm going to say it's the ability to provoke to get things done. It's all of those behavioural things that we hear them call them the soft skills, which I absolutely hate that term. I call them essential human skills, and I take that term from one of my clients, a lady by the name of Julie Tickle, who shared that with me. And then I look at the technical side of it, and it's all around the process and the strategy and all these things that are really important. Negotiation, communication, all that sort of stuff. Process, things that I used to be really wedded to, that I became less wedded to and went to the human side, but then found I could bring them together. So I think it's a good activity for anyone to do is don't get trapped with the usual corporate jargon around what leadership capability is. Divide it into your essential human skills and your technical skills, and then look at it and go, wow, if I put these two together, it's not one or the other, it's both. How effective could I be as someone who's demonstrating leadership in an organization? I don't think we do it enough.
Yeah, that the deep dive into what your philosophy of leadership is is a difficult one because I'm a believer that once people get into certain roles, you stop potentially thinking about how do I get better at the craft of being a someone who's dealing with other human beings. And exactly what you said before, people bring their personal lives to work. You're spending a third of your time in a job. If you're in a corporate gig or you're in a small business, you're almost 100% of your time is worried about the business and trying to survive, having these skills and understanding that people have got things going, could have family problems, could have illness in the family, they could be ill. There's lots of stuff that life will throw at you that makes the process of managing people exceptionally difficult. So yeah, couldn't disagree. I haven't done that exercise of splitting the two, and it'd be interesting to see what comes out on my list. I think the human one, in for some people, and I would put myself there, and I think I've learnt from it, is that I just assumed you had the human factors there and you could just draw on them. But I think sometimes people forget some things around dealing with human beings, particularly being empathetic and understanding, and walking even a couple of feet in someone else's shoes is can be a difficult task for some people. Like yourself, I've spoken to a lot of leaders, and in my professional life, I think I've met one or two human beings that I don't think had the capacity for empathy, and I think that makes it difficult to be an effective, decent human being, let alone a leader. Have you met people like that don't have an empathetic bone in their body that are leading people? Can you be effective as a leader without empathy?
Um, I think people, well, you can be effective as a manager without showing empathy because you can manage to get things done by whatever method that you use to do that. I think, and we start to embrace true human leadership. It's critical that, and you don't have to be absolutely the best at it, but you need to have some of those sorts of qualities, skills, characteristics in your repertoire to be able to get people to do. Because one of the challenges of leadership is a lot of times we're trying to get people to do what they don't want to do. We're trying to get them to change. Now, you can write all the memos in the world you want about here's the new change that's coming up, and everyone. I sent the memo out to you, Eric. You got it. Therefore, the change is happening, but that's not helping people's beliefs and behaviours. So you need to be able to demonstrate and show some empathy to ask the question I said early on: is what do you fear? What do you fear about this change? What do you fear about this new program that we're running? If you don't ask those questions and just go blindly into the next phase, what usually happens is you get to a point and you go, oh shit, that didn't work. We better come up with a new reason to change, and we'll take it to the town hall and we'll tell everyone again. And we keep following this cycle of let's just keep feeding people stuff that I'm going to say this, you dropped the S word before. Our bullshit detectors they go off really quickly. And so all of a sudden you've lost the people because you haven't actually spent time to go, I wonder what they're thinking about this. Now, I've worked in HR. I think I can say this. Most HR teams, some of them are getting better at it. What they try and do is they get the change. It looks a bit bad. They sprinkle some hundreds and thousands on it in some corporate message, and then they take it to the people who still have to bite into the shit sandwich. So we need to be honest. And the only way to do that is to show some of your human side.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think the proliferation, I would say, of change management jobs that are out there, because I'm on Seek a lot, and you look for work and you see what's out there, and change analysts and change managers and change leaders is the big one. And I think what some organizations still haven't caught on to is that the biggest issue, I believe, okay, this is Eric's opinion here, something we don't do well internally in businesses is bring people along the pathway of a change, give them the why for the need for the change and what does it mean for them, and have those open and honest conversations. And so people being hardwired the way that they are, resistance to change and being anti-change, I think is just hardwired in people. Whether leaders believe that or not, I think is to their detriment if they don't. But it's how you navigate the conversations around why do we need to change. And, if I use this example when you go see a doctor and they say, look, hey, you put on a few kilos, you need to change some habits, you need to get healthy. You can choose to ignore that advice, but it's going to be to your detriment long term for your health and for all sorts of things. So if you're willing to listen to a doctor who, again, this thing about they have a professional veneer about them, so you're going to listen to them because they know what they're talking about. If you haven't built respect in your teams and they don't believe what you're saying, their BS radar is finely attuned. I think Aussies are very good at this, that if you're not genuinely you when you're talking about something, people pick up on that stuff almost.
Absolutely, they do.
Yeah, almost immediately.
And just I guess just to challenge the notion of change resistance, and maybe there's something else at play here for humans to think about. I mentioned Andrew O'Keefe before, who wrote the book called Hardwired Humans, which Andrew's based up in New South Wales. And a lot of his work's based around these 9 instincts we have, and they've been developed by a guy called Professor Nigel Nicholson from over in the London Business School. Now, he says one of our instincts is not change resistance, it's loss avoidance. And I think this is where, excuse me, mate, I think this is where we get this wrong in the change process. Is we're trying to work out how we can sugarcoat and put hundreds and thousands on what people won't accept without actually trying to understand what we think they're going to lose. So I'll give you an example of that. Open plan offices became a big thing 15 years ago. Now, when you make the change to open plan offices, some people who already sit in open plan, they're not losing anything. But people who had an office are losing a lot, not just the physical location, but the status, the identity, the feeling that it gives them if they have family and their family comes in, and all of a sudden you're going to send their family in and see them at an open desk that they've got to sort of fight for every day. Until we start to spend time and invest time in the leadership space to go, what is the change meaning to Eric versus Mark? And then how do we have that conversation at an individual level rather than just go, let's throw a blanket over both of them and hope this works out okay? So I just want you to consider this for you and your watchers and listeners, is start to look at it as loss avoidance than change resistance. And I'm going to quote Marty Linsky here because I use this quote every day. We fear loss much more than we value gain.
Yeah, nice. Okay. Yeah, give me something to think about. So one good part of this process of having this conversation is I hopefully walk away learning something. I definitely will have a look at that. I personally, before this conversation, always looked at change as a resistance to something new or a new state of affairs, but that twisting it on its head and asking about what do you fear you're going to lose in that process is a different question entirely, and one I don't think gets asked well or gets asked at all. Because
I just quickly, I think resistance is the secondary behavior after they work out the magnitude of their loss. So if loss is low in magnitude, resistance is low. If loss is high in magnitude, resistance is high. And resistance takes many forms, doesn't it? It can be the water cooler conversation. It can be aggressive. It can be passive aggressive. It can be withdrawal, whatever it can be. But for people to think that change resistance is real, but it's not the first thing, it's the secondary thing.
Yeah. Okay. Look, we could have a podcast around that, and I think we will come back to that as a topic area. It's always been of interest to me, again, because I see this proliferation of companies looking for people that are good change agents, and be interesting if they're all working off that same hymn sheet, or if it is the old style thinking that I had, that it's about resistance up front, and maybe it's a whole lot of other things. People are complicated. No two people think the same about something, and what someone feels subjectively about something is very different to the next person, and they're not necessarily going to be thinking along the same lines. Nor, to be honest, is people's motivations for being at work. Some people live their work. Some people are passionate about what they do, and others are very utilitarian. They go to work, earn a check, happy to do what they need to do for their shift and go home. There's nothing
Yep.
wrong with that
No,
either. But it suggests that people are motivated by um, different things. So, Mark, let me ask you the following. I ask this in all of my podcasts, and I'd love to get your view on it. The nature versus nurture question: Are leaders born, or are they made?
I think they're made. I think, I'm going to preface this by saying that I've drunk the Kool-Aid of adaptive leadership, where they talk about the fact that leadership can be taught. So I'm absolutely in the camp that that with the right guidance, the mentorship, coaching, teaching, the right mindset, that this can happen. And I think I'm proof of it, of being bad Mark to becoming good Mark, was that I had to continue to learn, as I do today. I learned from this podcast today and I learned to be better at leadership by talking to different people. And I'm, nearly 56. So it's about embracing being taught, not that they're born.
Yeah, I 100% agree. One thing I've posed to people, and I still can't let go of this in my own thinking, is you meet human beings in your travels that have got an X factor around how they deal with other people, or when they're put into leadership roles, they're just naturally good at marshalling resources, marshalling people, getting some stuff done. I think we all have that capacity. I guess it's if you don't have the environment and where you've got the ability to make some mistakes, learn from those things, and get people to help you grow through either coaching or mentoring or teaching or some combination of those things. Nothing's impossible. I tend to see the world as glass half full, not glass half empty. So I think everyone's got that opportunity. That said, I think there are some human beings that should never be leaders. I've met these people. I have it in my head that there are some people that are just not cut out to work with other human beings. It doesn't mean they can't do a job, but leading people and getting the best out of other human beings is something that is not in everybody. People may disagree. What's your view?
Well, I think some of those people that you've just described, I wonder if part of the issue has been that they were never asked the question at the front end, do you want to manage another human being? They were just force fitted into that, and their natural inclination was to keep doing the work that they love doing. And then you get to a point, I think, where it's less about other people and more about just protecting yourself. So then other behaviours turn up. So um, I don't know that I've ever come across someone who turned up and went, I'm just going to be a real ass. But I think the system that we've created, which is why I say the human skills and the technical skills put together is where we need to start, is that you then give people an even chance to become more effective in their leadership role than if you just put them into it and pray that it works.
Yeah, that's it. Pray and hope is never a good strategy for helping people. No. So, final question for you, Mark.
Yep.
If you had the chance to go back to that 20-year-old version of Mark and say, "Hey, these are the things you need to think about to be more effective with other human beings," what would that list look like for you?
Um, this might be real left field. I actually I wouldn't give that 20-year-old Mark the list, because I want Mark to live the experience. Because I'll put it this way. I often say to people, don't try and save another person from their catastrophe, because they need to live they need to live the catastrophe in order to come out the other side better for it. So I wouldn't give Mark that list. I'd let Mark experience it, the highs and lows and everything in between, and sort of allow him to feel a bit of tough love.
Yeah, that's the first. You're the first one to say it like that, and I can see some value in that. I guess you Often, and I'm thinking about this more and more as I age, that, geez, I'd do things different when I was in my 20s, knowing what I know now. But you don't get to this point without having experienced some good stuff and some really crappy stuff along the way that has hopefully transformed you into a better person. Not worry about the leadership stuff so much, but your life experiences can change you for good or bad. So yeah, I could see where you're coming from. I probably, and I can't resist saying this, I probably would give myself the list and go, well, here's the cheat sheet. Try and avoid some of these things, but life being what it is, I think you can't avoid the foibles of life. So,
I
Mark,
agree.
Thank you for your time. So, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that, mate?
Well, there's a couple of ways. LinkedIn would be the best place. I'm on LinkedIn, as I see you on LinkedIn a lot, and I think it's fantastic that you're there. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I think it's an amazing platform to build connections and to build both personal connections and commercial connections. I'll say that up front. My website's www.marklebusque. It's LEBUSQUE.com. On there, there's my two books. You've got my programs, my podcast, and my fortnightly blog that goes out. You can subscribe to it there. So they're the best places to get me. And please, any of your watchers or listeners, because we've had this conversation a bit earlier, reach out. I'm a human being like you, and if you've got a question, don't think, oh, I can't ask him that. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. So that's the best place to get me.
I'd like to thank Mark for his time today. A great discussion. Thanks again for your support. If you like today's content, please drop a like. Or alternatively, if you want to help me grow the channel, please subscribe. Have a great week. Look after yourselves, and we'll catch everyone on the next episode of Talking Leadership TV.